Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Offside, a show where we from Barca Football talk a little bit about football, a little bit of Barca, and everything in between. This week on Sunday, Barca played Cadiz in the first home game of the season. After last week's Portola's ball, Barca Twitter and the Barca fan base went into complete meltdown at the performance. And it was like last year's champions were suddenly not good enough and Xavi was a terrible coach. Now, this is very common in the Barca fan base, Barca Twitterverse, this kind of extreme opinion. To be entirely honest, we were also extremely critical. But the fact is that football's not played on Twitter. It's played on the pitch, and the people on the ground have a couple of more ideas than we do sitting behind our keyboards giving opinions as fans. So in this episode, we're going to go a little bit deeper and see what changes did Xavi make, if they had any impact on the game. We're going to look into some stats. We're going to look into some clips and some tactical aspects and actually compare if there was any improvement from what we saw against Getafe.
A win is a win, and this win was not only just the 3 points. I think that we have seen some good stuff for Barca. Some bad stuff. It's always a mixture of both, but I feel like Xavi has made some improvements. He has tinkered with the squad a little bit, and to be honest with you, to have Getafe and Cadiz as your first 2 games of the new season, I would not wish that to my worst enemy. I really wouldn't. So having gotten 4 points out of those 2 games, I think it's good. It's not perfect, obviously, but it's still something that we can take out of it and feel good about.
With that, let's get cracking. And we'll start with some stats from the game, and we'll compare some of these key stats with what we saw against Getafe. So this is the formation that Barca set out with. Dom, any points from you on this formation when you saw it?
Well, obviously, Lamine is the big talking point, and we did discuss him in the past as well. And my honest reaction to this is that, of course, we have to be careful with him. We have to make sure that he is not overplayed, but at the same time, if he is so good, if he's good enough, he is old enough, and he is proving to be good enough. He's proving to be someone who understands how Barca need to play and understands how Barca need their right winger to operate in Xavi's system. But other than him, of course, De Jong being in that deep role, in the John Stones role, as people have now proclaimed that role to be, I think this is what suits him. This is what we've seen in the past under Koeman as well. And even going back to Ajax as well, he is someone who can start that deep and then progress forward. But you mentioned it, Pedri as well. Pedri is still high, but he is on the left side of the pitch, and that makes all the difference now because Barca still play with the overload to isolate tactic, and they still overload the left side of the pitch and isolate the right side of the pitch. And this is pretty big because one of the midfielders that plays on the underloaded side or the side that gets isolated is often the player who doesn't participate as much. Now, having Pedri on the left meant that he was going to be the one to contribute more to every phase of the game. So I think even though you have him higher, he's not exactly in his controller role per se. He is still someone who can influence almost every phase of the game. And that, to me, was a big change that not only got the best out of Pedri, but then at the same time, it boosts Barcelona as a squad, as a whole, as a unit.
I think also his proximity to Gundogan. If you look into De Jong, Gundogan, and Pedri, they're almost in the same channel. I think that genuinely had an impact on the game. So this is the pass map that we see, and I think it kind of reflects the formation that we saw last. You can see the left channel, and then you can see the right winger making those runs into the box to again bring the crosses in and open the block.
This is exactly what we expect from Xavi. This is exactly what we talked about in our preseason video as well, and the preview of this season. This is what Xavi will more often than not, this is what he will do. He will overload one side of the pitch and isolate the other side. And the right winger at this moment, and given this squad's profile, the right winger is still the focus of our attack. This being Lamine makes sense because he does have that in him. He has the dribble, he has the movement, and he has the ball striking to be that isolated piece on the right side of the pitch. And the left side is where you put your more combinatory players who can link up, players who are strong on the ball, players who are confident to burden the pressure and then eject the threats on the other side. And that's what this is. This is overload to isolate to a T. This is 101 overload to isolate.
Only difference being Pedri on the left rather than on the right.
Exactly. And you see Gavi here, number 6. that is the unfortunate side effect of this tactic, because the player on the right side is always going to be more isolated. That was Pedri against Getafe, and he didn't see the ball at all. That was a weird choice by Xavi because he played Pedri on the underloaded side. And that means that that player doesn't see as much of the ball. And if Pedri doesn't see as much of the ball, then you have a problem. So that's why he moved Pedri on the left, and now Gavi is in this unfortunate situation, but he is still good enough to lay the ball off and make those quick 1-2 passes with Lamine, but also being someone who's more aggressive off the ball. So that kind of does suit him more than Pedri.
This is kind of comparison in terms of the goals, some of the XGs, and so on. So I wouldn't talk too much about the fact that, yeah, obviously the XG was far more. We did create a lot of chances. And yes, on another day, maybe we would have scored 4 or 5 goals for sure. But Ledesma was brilliant, to give him due credit. The 24 shots that Barca created talk about the fact that there was a discernible change in the way Barca faced the block, tried to unlock it. And I think they were successful many times.
Actually, yes, this is the thing with Twitter narratives and our points of view, because had Barca scored those couple of chances in the first half, and they easily could have, I guess, a different goalkeeper on a different day, we could have scored 2 or 3 goals in the first half, and all of a sudden you have a completely different narrative. Barca are the best again. Xavi is a genius for changing his tactics. But unfortunately for Xavi and Barca, nothing would just come in. Nothing would go through that goalkeeper. He was, that's an ongoing meme with Barca, that every goalkeeper that we face turns into this prime Neuer or Yashin, whatever you have. And it's true. It's true to a certain extent, because it does happen often.
If you look into the overall gameplay, and I wanted to just pick up a few things on the touches in the opposition box. Now look at the number of that 44 touches in the opposition box. That's a pretty number. If you look at the gegenpressing index, they were pretty much on the ball, recovered possession quickly enough. With 75% of the possession, 80% of field tilt. It was basically Barca was playing ball throughout. Yes, we probably did not have the finishing boots to complete some of the good moves that materialized. But overall, I would say this is a huge improvement over Getafe.
Oh, absolutely. You can see it in all the stats, and the eye test confirms it. And this field tilt just goes to show you that Barca were camping, they were just dominating the territorial battle, and that's very important. And having this much possession can be meaningless if you can't do anything about it. But the threat and the touches in the box, and even the XG and all that, it all shows that Barca were not only dominating the field and possession, but also dominating their chance creation as well. They were actually doing something meaningful with their possession. It's just that nothing would go past Ledesma, and that's, it's fair enough. But at the same time, on a different day, I think we're having a much different conversation at halftime already.
I completely agree with you. And this again shows the threat timeline. Like if you look into the whole, if you take the whole composite of the 90 minutes or the 100 minutes that were played, we were creating consistent level of threat throughout that half.
I thought that someone like Fati and Ferran were actually pretty ideal for this setup, because you have these elite distributors of the ball, and Gundogan in a deeper position where he can kind of just ping those balls in behind the opposition's lines, and even Pedri coming deeper and then combining. All you're missing is someone who can attack that space at a very, very high level. The main point of having so much possession is you make the opposition run. When you have the ball, you have to run less than the opposition. And what Barca have done in the past, and still do to a certain extent, is this verticality that they enforce makes them run almost equally as much as the opposition. And especially when you compare that, when you combine that with this high man marking press, that makes Barca players exhaust themselves. It's not sustainable. But if you are calmer in possession, if you wait for your moment, that's how you tire out the opposition and not yourself. That's how you defend with possession of the ball. That's what they call defending with the ball.
I wanted to see who are the people who are actually the most involved, right? And if you look into it, there's a curious trend or similarity that you can see in all these 4 boxes, right? So if you look at the non-penalty XG, X threat from carries, open play X assist, or just threat from passes, look at the names. Gundogan, Koundé, Pedri. These names keep coming back, right? And FDJ, obviously, from that perspective. So it does show that the changes that Xavi made, putting De Jong back into center-back position or the John Stones position, and then making that switch with Pedri on the left hand side, and then getting him closer to Gundogan to operate with him, build up more of a link up play between each other, which is what created the first goal in the first place. It did have a necessary impact. The data proves that.
If you have Pedri and Gundogan combining more and being closer to each other and playing off of each other, that's a recipe for success, I think. And Koundé is very interesting here as well, because he was also in that distribution role that I think will see Cancelo. And people have talked about Cancelo being the overlapping fullback and being that threat on the outside. But this is actually what Cancelo thrives in, being just outside of the block in that right half space and then distributing the ball from there. He is much, much better than Koundé in that position. And if Koundé can already do this much damage, I think Cancelo will do just fine in that specific role.
Couple of more pointers. The two names that are on 3 quadrants, Koundé and Gundogan. Is it a sign of times to come that Gundogan is actually settling down into his role and Xavi is understanding how best to utilize him? And from a Koundé's role perspective, has his role slightly changed?
I think it has changed even from the last game, because Koundé was often used in a more attacking way to compensate for interiors having a different role. Because against Getafe, we saw Pedri pinning the back line. He was high up the pitch. He was making those runs. He was on the shoulder of the defenders all the time. But instead, now we have Koundé that in that role, he sometimes pushes forward, and that enables our interiors, our midfielders, to actually come closer to the ball and interplay with the ball a bit more. So in that sense, this change has already made a world of difference for Pedri because he is more involved. But also having Koundé in that position on the right half space where he can distribute the ball, if you let him be a bit deeper and utilize his diagonal balls, his cross into the box, his right foot passes, you can get an attacking output out of Koundé as well. Gundogan could have been used in the box more against Cadiz, because against teams that kind of suffocate the midfield and you have Frenkie de Jong distributing, Koundé distributing, and Pedri distributing, then Gundogan can be that man to make the movement inside the box. I felt that was something that Xavi could have done. And as soon as Gundogan moved higher up and combined closer to the box, we got the goal.
If we take both games, right, between Getafe and Cadiz, and this is from a short perspective, and look at those numbers. So if you take those 2 games, there is an absolute gulf of difference. 24 against 14, 10 against 4. We almost doubled our output from that perspective. And that clearly goes to show that there was something that we did right in unlocking the block.
Yes, I would agree. We made some changes. Xavi made some changes that worked for the best, and I feel like that reflects in the stats as well. We saw that Barca were more proactive. They were more successful at unlocking that block, as you said. The only thing that was missing were the goals in the first half, but the foundation is there. So we know that we can create those chances. It's just that putting them away is sometimes a labor, and sometimes it's our fault because we can't finish, and sometimes you just have a goalkeeper like that who will just make the impossible saves, and you can't do much against that.
If you look into the XG that was created, from open play and from set pieces, marked improvement from game 1 to game 2. Again, clearly shows that at least the team did sit down and have a think about things and actually came up with a plan to be better, right? And it comes across in the same, if you look at the overall threat that was created, right? Whether it was from carries, whether it was passes, overall, I think it was a lot more of a disciplined football. Maybe it was not champagne football, but it was much better than what we saw against Getafe. And it was a deliberate change. It was a thought-through change. It was not something that just happened on the field.
The reality is that against these teams that like to sit back and soak up pressure, there's not much that you can do that's also flashy and aesthetically pleasing. Sometimes picking those crosses into the box, into your runners, can be effective. We saw that with last season as well. We talked about this, having Luke de Jong there. We sometimes played better football with Luke de Jong. We scored more goals because at the end of the day, if those teams park the bus all the time and there's not much space to exploit or create, there's not much you can do that will be aesthetically pleasing and effective. here we have the tactical board from last night, and this is just an overview of Barca's formation. Now, here I have Pedri on the left wing as well, but we all know that Pedri will inevitably move infield, and Barca will create a box system that we know that Xavi loves at the moment. And up here on the left side, I want you to just take a look at these aspects that I've listed, because most of these aspects we have already discussed in our preview video, and we said that Xavi has some of these non-negotiable aspects to his tactics that he will try and replicate in every single game, and regardless of the opponent. And that's what happened last night as well. We had the numerical superiority, we had the third man sequences, and we have the overload to isolate. And those three were heavily featured against Cadiz as well. Now we have some new ones like interior play or distribution and running, which I will discuss. And these are the adjustments that Xavi has made specifically for Cadiz and as an improvement from the Getafe game. Now, first, the numerical superiority, we know what this means. By now, Xavi wants to have more players in certain areas than the opposition, because that allows him to easily bypass the press and proceed forward into their block and gain territory. At its most simplest form, this can be seen right here in the first line. Having De Jong as this left center back means that Barca have a 3 versus 2 in the first line of press. Cadiz will press with 2 players, and they will try and disrupt the flow of the ball in that way. But if Barca have the third center back here, well, what they can do, they can easily shift the ball to De Jong, and De Jong can make that run that he always makes to gain territory and advance up the pitch. If this doesn't work, and if this is a bit more tightly marked, we see Barca employ the third man sequence, where, for example, someone like Romeo can come closer, come right here, and then someone from the back line will pass the ball to him, and he will quickly lay it off into space, into the third man, who is usually De Jong. Now, why De Jong? We know that he has this tendency to run with the ball. He does it superbly. He has the athletic and the physical base to do so, to shrug off markers, and also do this over long stretches of the pitch as well. So De Jong will receive the ball here deep, and then he would run with it forward to gain territory. And then Barca, and as they settle in the final third, then they do their link-ups, the combination play, and the distribution play, which we'll see. But going on over to overload to isolate, we saw this in the past maps as well. We saw it in preseason. We saw it last season, featured heavily. Barca, what they will do, they will pick one side to overload, which is mainly the left side of the pitch, and they will try and put all their players towards that one side of the pitch. So that will inevitably force the opposition to do the same thing. So they will have to move to the side where Barca are, and that will isolate Yamal right here on the right wing, and Barca can use their interplay to eject the player who they want to eject into space. That was mainly Yamal, and that's what he does well, because he is a player who can thrive in one versus one positions, and someone who can distribute the ball and link up well in the final third as well. Now, the unfortunate side effect, as we talked about, is this right midfielder. So Xavi was often the player who would just have a very, very simple role of laying the ball off. Let's say De Jong advances with the ball from this deep area. He will run with the ball. He will gain territory, and then he will combine with Gundogan and Pedri right here. And what Pedri would do is quickly eject it to Xavi. And then what Xavi does, he has a very simple job of just moving the ball over to Yamal. So it's quick interplay between interiors to eject the player, the main threat that is on the other side. Unfortunately for Xavi, that's mostly what his role was. His role was to either lay the ball off quickly in 1 or 2 touches, or be someone who drags the markers away and frees up Yamal, or frees up Pedri, or frees up Gundogan to do their thing. We saw another change with Xavi, where you had the interiors always between the lines. That's important because that's where you want them to be to have maximum effect. Let's put Balde higher up, and then Cadiz, what they often did, they put 5 players in the back line, 3 players in the second line, and 2 players in the first line. That's how they pressed. Barca had 2 players or 1 player here. Romeo was always deeper to kind of cover, And Koundé was in this position right here, and De Jong in this position right there. Why is this important? It's because those are Xavi's distributors of the ball. Koundé can distribute the ball, and Frenkie De Jong can do it, and Gundogan can do it from here. And then all of a sudden, you have players like Lamine, like Gavi and Lewandowski making those runs into the box. Like this, and like this. And then these players from these positions outside of the block, who are proficient on the ball, who can pass the ball into the box, they have the space and they have the means to put all those crosses into the box. And you have the players on the outside, the wingers keeping width, which means that stretches the back line and gives the space horizontally. If these players are wide initially in the final third, that increases the space between their defensive line and makes more space for the players between the lines to make those runs that we just talked about. So this was Xavi's main idea, having the distributors outside the box and having the runners inside it, and having the space between those lines horizontally and vertically to make those runs in the first place. And that's essentially what happened throughout the whole first half, and it was quite effective.
But I still think that, we faced a frustrating 80 minutes, right? We did create a lot more than Getafe, but that fluidity is still not there. What do you think is the reason for that? And do you think that as the team gels together better, that's going to come back?
I think it should come back. The main idea here is to have your best players close to each other and trying to have those players link up more and combine more together. At the moment, you're losing one of the interiors in Gavi here because he is, as we've noticed now, he is someone who has a very simple task, a task that doesn't require him to be on the ball as much. So we saw Pedri more involved, and we saw Gundogan more involved. Not only that, we saw them combine together more. So that's a good step forward. We saw De Jong in a role that kind of liberates him and enables him to start deep and then finish high, which is what he loves to do. And to me, it feels like dealing with Balde as well, because he is at the moment put into these 1-versus-1 situations higher up the pitch, but Balde needs space. He needs space to beat his man. So I'm not sure this is very optimal. And it's also not optimal because he's a fullback holding width. And that will always be suboptimal because of the timing. He has to start here and go here, which means that he's not here to start with. And this player right here, so Cadiz's player, can now be more tightly marking Pedri because there's no one here to mark. But if Balde was here, that would immediately force this player to increase this distance between the defenders. So if it's the winger holding the width, the winger starts high. If it's the fullback holding the width, he will arrive high. So he will start deep but arrive high, and that matters. There are still bits and pieces that Xavi can optimize this team. So we'll see how he does it.
When you think about tactics and football, obviously job of the coach is to set up those templates, set up those formations, build up that formula. But obviously the execution matters. And the execution is on the ground from the players. Now, if they fail, there is one critique to be made that are they doing those drills enough to get the execution really pinned down at the moment that it needs to happen? We don't know because we're not at the training ground. We don't know what drills they're doing and so on. So it's hard to, make a comment on that. But I would assume that if he thought this much about how he wants to play that game, probably he would have created drills where people are also practicing it. All said and done, it's a new team. A lot of changes every season in this team, people leaving, people coming out. So for that core to form, which is consistent and is used to playing with each other over long years, that hasn't yet happened in this new Barca. So hopefully once he gets that and he gets the kind of players that he wants to have to play the kind of football that he wants to play, I think we'll see a lot more fluidity.
This is just the beginning of the season. It's very tough to judge Barca or Xavi based on the first two games, especially because they were Getafe and Cadiz. But this adaptation from Xavi, that's what fills me with hope. He's trying hard to solve problems that Barca have. And if he can do that and actually solve the major problems along the way, I think it can only be good. So hopefully that's exactly what he does, and hopefully we see it in action very soon.
Well, I hope you all enjoyed it. That was our review of, let's say, Barca Cadiz. We want to look into what happened behind the scenes a little bit to the extent possible, and we'll work it out. So that's it for today. Tune in for the next one. See you then.